Welcoming on stage QZ, who's going to be moderating, Vitalik, and Julian from Octant.
I'll sit in the middle. So, welcome to the second half of ETHTaipei. Today's panel is all about trying to let people understand that what you might be doing might be DEC, and also to kind of tease out what are some interesting paths forward for DEC. So just a quick introduction, I'm QZ. I help to kind of put the event together and work with the Ethereum Ecosystem Fund. And I'm very glad that we have both hosts with me here today to kind of like tease out a bit more about what DEC is going to be. So I want to just quickly start to ask Vitalik, actually. Why do you think that DEC is relevant today?
I think it's because in our particular time, we, I think, simultaneously very easily see the downsides of all three of the other possible approaches, right? And I mean, a lot of the thinking for me was definitely motivated by like what we saw during COVID, and COVID was, of course, both a biodefense situation and an info defense situation, and we saw some of the, I mean, both successes and failures on both sides. I mean, I think failures of centralized biodefense, I mean, even things like how the aspects of the way that the vaccine distribution was done was like benefited some countries much earlier than other countries. It was a fairly fragile supply chain. The way that the info environment around everything was done. So first, like basically telling people that COVID is not airborne, and which is disinformation coming from the exact people that are supposed to be telling you what all the other disinformation is, and then I mean even in the vaccine process, it was like a similar thing where there were people like basically presenting a much more clean and pure picture of the level of safety and efficacy of the vaccines than was like actually shown by reality, and like basically the desire for like a clean narrative as opposed to an imperfect truth ended up actually seeding a lot of the backlash and confusion in a lot of those cases, right? And I mean, at the same time, in the context of AI, there's this whole question of like, what kind of an AI world do we actually want? AI has a lot of potential to empower people. AI also has the potential to break humanity in, I think, multiple ways, right? Either causing, like basically, as I call it, there's like risk of doom and there's risk of domination, and like we're definitely like AI domination is already a reality in all kinds of countries where things like political protesting have rapidly become extremely dangerous to the point of being like not viable, and so it's and then at the same time, there's all of this concern about technological stagnation, and it feels like we're actually exiting out of that era. And so it's important to really think about like what is the thing that we actually wants to exit out of stagnation toward. And like DEC was my attempt at coming up with an answer to that.
I think it's interesting that you've touched on a lot of very salient points throughout the different aspects of DEC. And I think something that maybe you could also chime in a bit is actually how do we ensure that some of these things are actually funded rather than taken aside, right? I think DEC, as you've kind of alluded, is a choice, right? It's for you to actually choose something, choose the future that you want to see, rather than just like going along with like what's happening in AI. And if we don't actually make that choice, sometimes it is chosen for you, right?
So maybe expanding a little bit on what I mentioned in the morning. I'm an economist by trade, and I believe in markets, and I believe in market forces, and most of the times they are great. They deliver us everything we need. The problem is that in some situations they fail, and when they fail, they can fail in a pretty catastrophic way. And I think we are witnessing right now the very dangerous combination of this failure and technology advancement. So basically, like the digital monopolies are probably not the worst thing that they could be yet. It might get worse.
Oh, no.
And of course, like a lot of like a doomsday scenarios, like exactly envision this like a race to dominate things with the most powerful AI, and this is driven by the market forces themselves. And this is not the only example, of course. Like this is the easiest example, but you have many other examples like these, like we discussed like before, with like creating like a great medicines that would help a lot of people, but capturing all the profits for the big pharma. So to me, the question is, if we see this danger, like how we can make the advancement in technology more open. And of course, on the one hand, like we can state what we believe in, and we have already open source software movement, and we have all the like a copyleft ideas, but I don't really think we have a business models around that to make that happen. Of course, well, we do, but they are provided by the state, actually. So when you have like the research funded by the state, this is exactly it. But I think we need like a novel ways of like ensuring that what we believe in happens by ourselves as a communities, as a societies, let's say. But I don't think we have tools for that yet. So this is like what I think, as I said in the morning, I think this is our mission. Maybe our mission as Octant, but I actually think this is our mission also as a Web3, and this is where this connection with the DIAC is, to figure out how to like fund all the great things we want to happen in a way that will not burn us. I don't know if that's the answer to your question. Probably this is like a rephrasing your question, but like that's it.
I think that makes quite a lot of sense, actually. And
Yeah.
V, you have some suggestions for this, right? Like the copyleft movement. And
Yeah, and so I think one of the challenges of I think there's like two kind of things that like technology that the market builds kind of doesn't do by default, right? And it's basically the decentralized part and the defensive part, right? And of course, on the defensive side, in like modern operating systems are like many millions of lines of code, and like they get very frequently attacked. And like in general, there's definitely a culture of like caring more about reducing the latency between clicks from 328 milliseconds to 276 milliseconds than caring about security. But it's something. And there's the question of like, how do we actually do a better job of incentivizing that, right? And part of it I think is definitely just like reducing the cost of security to zero as much as possible. There's also interesting ideas around like reforming liability rules that I think people should seriously explore as ways to kind of motivate the market to like care about the security side more on its own. On the decentralization side, I think the big like risk when we're entering this era of like radical technology development, right, is basically that like if you have a mathematical model where like everyone is progressing and progress is like always building on itself, right, and then if the progress is super linear, and so someone who has twice as many resources is able to like gain more than twice as many resources in the next period of time, then that creates an environment where not only does whoever on top stay on top, but also like actually their lead increases over everyone else. And then if the math continues, then eventually like you get one actor controlling 51% and then eventually close to 100% of the whole world. And The reason why this has not happened historically is basically because like every actor in the world is like at least partially open, in the sense that like this is even reflected in like the things like the concept of catch-up growth in development economics, right? But the general idea that if like one unit in society is successful, then like that success automatically makes it easier for other people to build up to the same level. And like if that did not exist, then like realistically there would have been like one empire that conquered the world and would have stayed there, right? And in the context of technology, the challenge is that like that path can just like build up so much more quickly. And I think this is true with like definitely AI, potentially true with radical biotech, right? So like if you think about things like like using technology to genetically engineer to like improve people's intelligence, then like once you get past just like raw emotional reactions, often the first criticism of or like the first concrete worry that you hear about this is basically like the elite will have access to this first, and so it will like increase the entrenchment of one elite over everyone else, right? But like this is actually like true with every area of technology, because it's progressing so quickly, right? And so like I think there is a need to kind of more actively like nudge things to like even forcibly be more open than they otherwise would be, right? And so like this is I mean in part why like I've also become like more of a fan of like things like the non-compete the ban on non-compete agreements in the US, which would be like somewhat of a departure from my more libertarian approach early on. And the way that I justify it is it's like a way of basically forcing the kind of tacit knowledge of organizations to like be able to spread around more than it otherwise would. And I mean, for copyleft, it's I mean, like basically this is like licenses that are like GPL, right? Where like it's open source, but then if you build something on top, the thing you build on top also has to be open source. And the reason why I say this is that, or the reason why I think this is good is because it's like basically creates this like body of work where like if you want to like really benefit from this body of work that can hopefully expand over time and contain the best work, then like basically like you have to actually open source your stuff, right? And and so like basically making it easier to innovate in the open than to innovate inside of a closed silo is something that I think like our world needs to do more actively if we want to like basically avoid this kind of super cascade into one actor dominating, and instead have something where all of humanity can rise up together.
I think it's kind of beautiful how you paint like a shared world that we believe in, and it's something that has to do with public goods also. I think in your talk earlier, you kind of mentioned about how like funding public goods should be definitely reframed, and that this is something that is actually kind of critical to where humanity is moving. There's some thoughts about this also?
Yeah, of course yeah, I do, but this is, this is a huge topic, but I will try to create like a digestible pill. So like at first there's like a lot of confusion like what public goods are, and there are so many definitions, so many like I would say like a mental models around that like I don't even want to start that discussion. So I would rather say that we are talking about like funding things in a parallel way to purely market funding. So like when you think that the like a market will fail or will be not good enough to deliver what you expect, and then I would say this is where you think like some alternative funding has to kick in, and very often it does not have like a public goods properties, like does not like match the textbook definition and so on, but you still like want it to happen and want to fund it that way or another, right? And then like a traditional thinking is that you've got a government, like a central government, local government, whatever in between, that will step in like pay money and deliver that thing to you or your society, your compatriots, and so on. Now, I think we can see two trends that are dangerous. So we have both we have a deterioration in how efficient we are in delivering goods that way through the government, and we also have some kind of systemic problem with our governments, I would say. So how they function, do we love them, do we don't love them, and so on and so on. So I'm not one of these doomers saying everything is breaking apart, but for sure we have some systemic errors, systemic problems within our systems, and those systems are in fact, as I also claim, at the end of the day, funding is governance. So the most powerful tool governments have is to decide what's get funded. So to create budget for something or cut that budget. At the end of the day, this is also how how the power is projected, because you decide that a society will allocate some resources into a police, and then police that's what government says. So this is also a funding decision. We decide to have a police at the end of the day. So this is why I think this not really a public goods, but deciding, having new ways of deciding what to do, and by that I mean what to fund is mission critical and kind of important for surviving. So I think it goes way beyond Web3, and even to some extent beyond DIAC as a problem to be solved. And I also think that Web3 is quite well positioned to at least do some experimentation in that. That was one of the initial promises 10 years ago, that we will help with governance and with funding. So yeah.
It's definitely quite interesting, because I think maybe we can share a bit more about what are some of these criterion that we look at that might help us hint at a more DIAC kind of aligned funding sources or funded projects, right? Any thoughts on this also?
Yeah, so for sources of funding, I mean, I think the type of funding that a lot of these kinds of things have relied on historically is just philanthropy, people having money who are willing to give up that money because they believe in a cause. And I think in 2025, we're really seeing that channel kind of dry up quite a bit, right? And I think both, crypto being lower than before, and us not getting massive multi-billion-dollar dog coins in the same way, and that also out in the wider world, actually, yeah, the cuts to USAID, I've heard people from at least 3 different angles talk about how that's seriously disrupting the kinds of projects they were working on. And in the short term, that's those things are not coming back, right? And so the thing that that I think we need to move to is I think we need to generally figure out hybrid for-profit, non-profit structures that have teeth. So basically figuring out structures that are oriented around creating something that provides economic value, that's able to make a profit, pay people, even return money to investors, but that at the same time has some kind of mission other than making money, and where the mission component actually is really binding on the organization, right? And we can think of the whole OpenAI situation as a partial success, partial failure, right? Because originally it was this very idealistic kind of attempt saying hey, we don't want AI to be dominated by Google's DeepMind, let's make the better open pro-humanity alternative. And then first they sacrificed openness for safety, and then they sacrificed safety for maximizing profit. The thing but then at the same time, that process took quite a long time, right? And even after that process, even today, the nonprofit structure is still actually hamstringing their ability to get a very large amount of investment, right? So it's like still actually playing a role in slowing like very rapid ASI down, right? So it's it's this like interesting I think like lesson that you can learn from, right? But I think within our own ecosystem, like we've had like the Ethereum ecosystem, we've had projects where they've started off by being open source and then getting grants, but then they make a V1, but then at some point there's future versions, and those future versions start switching to proprietary licenses, switch the UI to being more centralized, and then I could go off the rails in multiple ways at the same time, and so I think there is this need for figuring out like what is a structure that's for something that is commercial and that's able to like unlock the much higher levels of capital that are available once you're commercial, but where like the mission part actually has some really solid staying power to it.
So an emphasis on has teeth, right? To some extent.
Wait, ST? Wait, Straits Times?
Because you mentioned that these models also need to have teeth.
Teeth, yes.
Yes, where it's not just by the grace of.
Exactly. Like I think like public benefit corporations in the U.S. are another one of those examples, right? It's like you have public benefit in the name, but like, is it illegal to start a public benefit corporation and then start like building out ASI and then use the profits from ASI to go and give some other group of people like digital fentanyl? Like no, it's not illegal at all, right? So it's like figuring out how like structures where the mission and like the other than profit component actually like has teeth in the sense of like actual hard power that within the organization that lasts a long time, I think is an important problem.
Absolutely. That's something that I think is quite new, I suppose. Not a lot of people talk about it. And you kind of mentioned a bit about also like different business models, right? And like, I think it kind of, there's a conversation here where it is, it kind of augments each other and they both kind of flow towards the kind of future that we want to lead to.
Yeah, for sure. Although I don't have an answer really to
I don't think any of us do.
To business model questions. So I think like maybe I don't want to talk too much if I don't have anything interesting to say. I just maybe we'll just have one comment to what Vitalik said before. I think the whole OpenAI situation actually shows that there are like a very, very strong incentives built into the fabric of our reality to do things non-DIAC way. Because like even we think that maybe it's not as bad as it could be. Like probably what's happening in OpenAI right now is not like how DIAC should do that, would do that. So and then like and it shows that even if you try to do things like with the safeguards towards like a harsh reality, then like a reality kicks in and this is what it is. So that makes this question really hard.
I suppose we're all still figuring it out, right? I think just maybe some final points.
If I may just add to that,
please,
so I think like actually what you also discussed in the morning is that the culture is really important, because like then if you build like a culture of like and you build a narrative of things, then all of the sudden you can change behaviors, even if there's like a harsh reality of money and markets is still around, but the people will like maybe adjust the behaviors at least a little bit through the social norm, not through very like a smart mechanism design. Like just comment to what was said before.
Yeah, I think so. When we look at the origins of DIAC, right, it came out with an initial blog post, right, talking about optimism. Not the chain, as in like optimism. And like, I think that's something that we're kind of alluding towards, right? That inherently the people in this room and this panel and talking about DIAC over different situations and countries, we carry a certain optimism that there is definitely a better way to do things, right? And that even though reality might be somewhat challenging, it is this optimism that kind of gets us there. So actually, I wanted to touch on this as my final point, but you kind of touched on it already. So we'll start with Julian for this, I think. You mentioned culture, right? What are some cultural norms or behaviors you feel that can help encourage a more DIAC kind of decision making?
So I think the most powerful thing that we sometimes underestimate is that like people want to be nice to each other, basically. So that's a human feature. And then yeah, well, but I think this is true, like especially on a small scale. So and I also think there are like a very powerful things in our societies right now that are like driving us in the quite opposite direction. And this is like I think true both for like social behaviors, but also for some, let's say, economic behaviors. And I think as for social behaviors, we are understanding that better and better right now. So on the one hand, like we have some understanding of like how social media like make us worse probably than better, and there is like this whole body of work debunking a lot of how is it called, like psychological experiments, like societal, like all the like a prison experiment stuff and so on. So like it turns out like people are not as bad as it was fashionable to assume like 20 or 30 years ago. And I think we can also like think about like a market-driven mechanisms and market-driven designs that would be like a kind of like a nicer in a way. So you can marry the two things. Like and as I said, like we don't have like answers here, but my intuition would be to go a little bit like a radical exchange direction. So try to build like a market mechanics whenever you want to, whenever it is possible, but try to remove some of the things that makes like a market terrible, like a concentration of like too much of concentration of wealth and power, for example, like monopolies. And I think there are like ways to do that, like either regulatory or through social norm or through mechanism designs. So maybe that would be my final word.
Thank you for that. And V, what are some of the cultural aspects you feel that can help us achieve the DIAC?
Yeah, and I think the most important cultural aspect is I think like the ideas like being there and being out there, and also in particular the it being clear what the idea is and is not, so that it does not get captured, right? Because the thing that we see with any nice sounding term is that like everyone wants to like label their pre-existing thing as like actually being compliant with this term, right? It's it's kind of like the criticism of carbon credits, where like basically they end up just like being used up by like companies doing things that they were already going to do anyway, and like it's not actually a benefit, right? And so the challenge, like an example would be like there's, I've definitely seen, people on Twitter use the word DIAC to refer to like basically EAC but open source. It was funny. I'm also not going to name names, but there was one Twitter account who called themselves a DIAC, but then in their lower level Twitter bio, like it said the word offense with an exclamation mark in capital letters. And then. At the same time, like there's definitely like somewhat fewer, but people who focus on the defensive and differential aspects of DIAC, but basically become national security AC. And of course, my criticism of national security AC, as always, is one man's national security is another man's like personal or national security threat, right? And I think our world is global, and we need an approach that is really like based on cooperation between people and nations more. And then. And we've seen this with other contexts as well, right? Even like OpenAI is the perfect example, right? It's like right in the name. Like, what is open about them? It's they're about equally open to like the other major companies. They're like less open than Q1 and DeepSeek. then like you see, even I mean, the word freedom gets abused this way all the time, right? So like you want well, like labels that like actually clearly refer to the thing, and where people have a good understanding of like what is the thing that we're after and what are the things that we're not after. Yeah, and, like that's something that I think can only be done by just like having and establishing a strong culture that like really understands and propagates those ideas.
So I absolutely agree. This is a perfect segue to the workshop after this by Joshua. So I'm going to wrap up the panel by thanking everyone and thank you for the conversation that we had. I think this will be the start of maybe a better understanding of where DIEC could go. And I hope that you continue the conversation together with us after this. Thank you.